All right, welcome back to day 10, everyone, of the Bones Daily Diary series. Nothing exciting today. Well, I mean, a little bit exciting stuff today. Gotta love, going out to a giant swamp area and then having to go up and down the entire location. Well, I mean, we're going up right now, and it's over I'd say 15 20 miles, and then we gotta go back down, which is over 15 to 20 miles. So clearly a fun time, I must say. But someone requested it, so we gotta do it. But here we are. That's just how it pans out, I suppose. um I guess in terms of exciting things, I got stuck in mud because it's a swampy area. So you take a one step in, you're like, oh, okay, a little wet, but not too bad. Another step in, it's a little bit deeper. You're like, oh, okay, nothing too crazy, nothing too serious. And then you take the third step, and next thing you know, your entire leg is engulfed by mud and water. So, what a delight, I must say. But I'm not gonna lie, work is work. Work is work. I'm kind of glad that I do have work, that I am working. I'm a working man. I can, get money, save money, and all that good, lovely stuff. At the same time, I'm not gonna lie to you, it is exceedingly frustrating because, here we are. I gotta save up as much as I can if I want to go back to school and do um, do a nursing career, because I gotta pay for my own tuition and everything. Of course, that's just standard. It makes sense. But you know, I got to save up as much as I can in order to deal with the program. Because, if I get hired, by an organization, then at least that way it makes sense. It feels and flows naturally, because it's like, oh, yes, you're working, come probationary period, you can get a tuition waiver and they'll cover a good chunk of the cost while you pay a little bit out of your pocket. But at that point, you're generating more money, and that's nice. But, until then, it's just waiting for the right moment, I guess. And, here we are, I'm making advances where, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And it feels promising. It does feel promising. I will say that. But, I, I guess part of it makes me realize that I just have to be a little bit more patient. You know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, yes, while I have all this stuff ready, I still have to wait for my transcripts to go over. I got to wait for my transcripts to go over. They get approved. They get processed. They cut out, a good chunk of my prerequisites, and I got to wait for the right prerequisite to open, and, get the lab version of it as well with a lecture and yada, 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 yada. It's just waiting upon waiting, which is fine. But, it's just like, I guess it's just waiting for something to happen, something different, something better. You know what I mean? I guess the reason why I'm a little bit more anxious, but also really excited for the nursing aspect, is because it is something that's moving forward gradually. I admit, gradually, a bit by bit, but it is something that's happening, and it's something that's moving forward one step at a time. Now, for what I'm doing right now as a land surveyor, it's fun, it is good, and we are doing stuff, and we are getting different jobs here and there, like, maybe like a side small, task to do, or maybe this and that. It is fun in that nature. But at the same time, it's like, well, here we are again. We're still just waiting for, something, I guess, better to happen in in some retrospect. Well, something better in the terms of, like, yes, nothing having to do with walking, over 20 miles in one location that's all swamp land and, filled with all sorts of insects and, creatures and whatnot. You know what I mean? But, it's just, that's it. I mean, besides the whole mud thing, it's whatever. I just wish that I can, get a spot more so on the internal side of things, because with the internal side of things, it's like, even if it gets boring, you feel content, because it's like, oh, yes, I'm not working in the heat anymore. I'm inside, I'm doing stuff, I'm doing productive stuff, I'm doing stuff that matters, stuff that counts, that works towards and builds upon something. It's promising. It's very, very promising. But then at the same time, it's like, you gotta wait for that position to open up, and then when you're waiting for that thing to open up, anyone else can apply, because it's fair game, quote unquote. And it's true. You gotta be fair and equal to as many people as you can get, but what can you do? Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, but that shouldn't be like the only stopping point, you know what I mean? And I get that, it shouldn't be the only stopping point, or it shouldn't be the only thing that I'm, waiting for, because there's a lot of other things to look forward to, and that's true. I'm looking forward to this, prospect of nursing. That's fantastic, but now it's like, okay, here I am, and I'm waiting for, like, I guess a new spot to open up, because the last one was given to someone else, and, no hate, no jealousy. They deserve it. They truly deserve it. They worked hard for that spot, and they got it, and, massive respect, massive kudos to them. Absolutely. But it's like, I can't keep waiting over and over for, this one thing to open up, and hopefully I get it, because who's to say, whether I'll get it or not. And then even then, it's like, they'll ask, your peers for their reviews of you, and, and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, if, let's say, your peers are, in support, but then, your supervisor is like, he could need a little more work, and, he may need a little bit more experience and stuff, then it all falls apart either way. Like, let's say if you're, like, right at the door, and then your supervisor's like, oh, yeah, maybe they may need a little bit more to deal with and more to work on. And then next thing you know, you don't get the spot, someone else does, and you got to wait for, the same thing to open up again. Because, what can you do? And then all the other spots available, they don't qualify for you because, you're underqualified for it. Unless you go back to school, and then, you get a whole other fucking degree for that, and then it's a whole other prospect and everything. It's like, God, just stacking upon stacking upon stacking of all that nonsense, you know what I mean? I think that's why I admit that's why I think low-key I've been thinking about changing jobs even, you know what I mean? Because it's like a good way to at least still make money to support, the tuition bills and, all that stuff, and myself here and there in terms of commuting and everything. But at least, that way, if I am getting that spot, it's nothing super insane. It's not like, oh yes, I have to go and walk in the swampy lands for God knows how long, or it's like, oh yes, I don't have to travel, 2.5 hours north for some random job in this random town that no one really often hears about unless they're traveling. It's like, it has its pros and its cons. It has its pros and its cons, that's for certain. But considering like how I was doing that pros and cons list, I admit, it seems very one-sided towards that other prospect, which is quite hilarious, I will admit. But it's okay. I don't know. I mean, I admit I don't really have much to say. I'm quite literally exhausted from, doing all that work and, just pacing and walking and, measurement stuff today. So I'm just kind of tired. I admit, I'm just very tired. I'm probably going to eat dinner and go to bed soon anyway, but, it's all right, I guess. It's all right. Thank you, everyone who's still here, who's listening and all that. I appreciate it. I'm gonna cut the video off a little short because it's just exhaustion. Admittedly, it's just exhaustion. But thank you very much. And I hope you all have a beautiful evening and that everything goes well. Much love, much appreciated.